Hello fellow Clashers, this is Carlos and welcome to the strategy guide to playing Siege. Today we're going to be talking about how to play the Expo against Beatdown decks. Thanks for jumping on today, guys. I've had a lot of people ask me for more in-depth tips on how to play the Siege archetype. We're going to start with Expo, and I'm going to start with a topic that a lot of people struggle with, and that is playing against Beatdown decks, which is a pretty good counter to the Expo deck. Now today we're going to be talking about, first of all, deck composition and what you need to have in your Expo deck, and then we're going to do some replays and also talk about some tips on how to actually play Siege. Now, a lot of the tips that are going to be in today's video are going to be very useful for playing with the Mortar deck as well. However, playing Mortar is a little bit different than playing Expo, and so I wanted to kind of specialize towards that. But if you're a Mortar user, these tips are definitely going to help you out as well. As far as deck composition goes, there are a few things that you really need in an Expo deck to make it successful against Beatdown decks. First of all, you need to choose between either a Fireball bait deck, a Cycle deck, or some type of a hybrid deck. Here's what I mean. Expo does take a little bit of effort to try and get locked onto the tower, and you need some way to guarantee your damage. So what that means is if you are struggling to get a push up together and your opponent ends up just fireballing the Expo as well as all of your support, that gives them a massive advantage. So you either need to have some type of trooper card in there to bait fireball so that they can't do it onto your Expo, or you need to learn to cycle. You have to have a deck that will allow you to cycle your Expo so that you can easily damage the tower, or you need a hybrid deck where you have another win condition that maybe is a little bit easier to deal damage to your opponent's tower with that other win condition, maybe Mortar, Hog Rider, or something like that. You also need at least one solid tank killer, but you'll want to really try and have two, because if you only have one, then when your opponent stops that one, then you're really going to struggle. You're also going to need some sort of a response to the pump, since Expos can really do very little against elixir collectors, and then you need a way to force your opponent to go on the offense. The reason why is because Expo typically plays best in response to an offense, either by playing on the other side or clearing the actual push and then continuing with your offensive Expo. So you need some way to force your opponent to go on the offense, especially against Beatdown decks, because the worst situation that you can put yourself in is to put your Expo at the bridge and then them respond with a heavy tank that your Expo is just not going to be able to eat through. You want to force them to go on the offense so that then you can respond with your Expo. You also need some cards that cost 4 elixir or less to quickly deal with swarms like the Skeleton Army or the Goblin Gang. You also need to be able to get rid of minions, all three of them, the regular minions, Minion Horde, or the Mega Minion, quickly. And then you also need to be able to get rid of, have a quick way to get rid of mini tanks such as the Ice Golem, the Knight, or the Mini P.E.K.K.A. Let's go ahead and take a look at this deck. This is a deck, I've actually done a video on it already, but this is a deck that I'm using in the ladder currently right now. And the reason why I chose this deck is because of how good it is with commons. It focuses on having a lot of commons in there, and then just a couple of rares. You have the Elixir Collector and the Inferno Tower, and then I can just focus on upgrading my Expo on Epic Sunday. This deck is really great for the ladder for that purpose if you don't have maxed out cards. Now, obviously I do have some maxed out cards, but I'm still climbing, still leveling up my cards. Now there could be better compositions, but for the ladder, I really like this deck. You'll notice here, first of all, we have a couple of tank killers. We have the Inferno Tower, and then we also have the Goblin Gang, and in rare situations we do have the minions, which can help get rid of some tanks. We do have a response to an Elixir Collector, which is my Elixir Collector as well, and this also acts as a Fireball bait as well. Having the Elixir Collector, placing that in the back, your opponent is going to be forced to use the Lightning or the Rocket or Fireball on the Elixir Collector so that your Expo is safe from spell damage. I also have cheap ways to deal with swarms like Zap and the Fire Spirits, as well as minions. Once again, I have the minions, the Fire Spirits, and then the Goblin Gang can help out with that as well. And then I do also have ways to respond to mini tanks like the Knight or Goblin Gang. and quick ways to deal with that. Okay, now that we have taken a look at deck composition, let's actually jump into some matches and talk about some things that are going through my head when I'm playing Expo. Now, you actually almost never want to play the Expo first. Your goal should be to play defensively until you know what they have, because it's so easy for so many win conditions to counter your Expo. Here, I waited, he ended up playing his Golem right at the very beginning, and that was the perfect time for me to put the Expo in the other lane. That's a very key, important part of this, because you do not want them to be defending against your Expo and then counter pushing with a full Golem push. Here, I was able to defend against his Goblin Gang and his Bats, and then his Archers, which finally took out my Expo, and then I was able to finish off his Golem with an Inferno Tower that was completely unaccompanied with support troops. And because of that, the Golem was very easy for me to deal with alone, which is great. Now I'm cycled back to my pump, and I'm going to go ahead and put that pump down in the very far back. He does the same thing, and I'm actually a little bit behind him when it comes to Elixir, just a touch. That's actually fine, because I would rather him put down his win condition first so that I can put the Expo down in the other lane. Now, you don't want to leak too much Elixir. If I was ahead of him, I actually probably would have played a little bit defensively, put some cards in the very far back, so that once again I could try and put down my Expo after he puts down his Golem, force him to go on the offense, then rather than having me go on the offense. You do not want to go on the offense first as a Golem pusher or as an Expo player. Now you'll notice on that last Expo, I placed down the minions right after I put down the Expo. And the reason why, I know that was a little bit further back in the replay, but the reason why I did that is because he had played the minion, or the Goblin Gang, and then also the Bats to defend my Expo, and it was most likely he was going to defend the same way. Here's another example. Golem, then I play my Expo. That's exactly how you want to do it every single time. Going back to my thought just now was that I wanted to defend against his defensive pushes for my Expo with those minions before he had done so. I wanted to try to do a little bit preemptively, and that's why I put those minions there beforehand as good counters against both the Goblin Gang, well, I can't even talk, and also the Bats. Here, my goal is to just try and defend. Now, I'm not able to defend his entire push, which is fine, but I am able to get this Expo down, turn those minions into a counter push, and get my Expo locked onto the tower right here, and that is all I need really to finish off the tower. At this point, I just need to use those Fire Spirits as a quick way to deal a lot of damage, and then just finish off this tower, which I'm able to do with plenty of time to spare. And there you can see the key point that I wanted you to see from that replay really was to wait for them to play their win condition before you play your own win condition. That is the big tip, number one tip right there, is to do that. Let's go ahead and watch against a giant deck for my secondary tip, which is a defensive position for your Expo and your Inferno Tower. Now here, I have a really great starting hand where I can place down that Elixir Collector. That's exactly what I want to do, because I want to force my opponent to go on their offense. I want to force them to go on the offense so that I can kind of like take advantage of the defensive positioning of this deck. Now, the strong point to Expo decks, not to necessarily say that Expos are great on defense, but you want to build a deck around being very defensive, because the whole goal of your deck should be to counter your opponent's pushes, to be defensive, to protect your Expo. That's the entire purpose of the entire deck, is to protect your Expo. And because of that, you thrive on defense, and you thrive when your opponent is forced to go on the offense. There, I placed my Expo not after he had played the Giant, but when I knew his Giant was out of rotation. So we're kind of going back into that key main point on playing Expo, and that is to wait until your opponent has played their offense and go the other lane, or wait until it is out of rotation. There, I placed down my pump, and I'm forcing my opponent to go on the offense. He ends up using his poison to do so, which is not a bad move on his part, but I would rather have him place the poison on my Elixir Collector than my Expo. Expo. Right here, I place a knight in the very far back. I'm ready to go on the push, and here I'm building up a push. He placed the giant a little too far back, and I end up getting this Expo ready to lock onto the tower. Now, it's most likely that he's going to zap it, and here's what I'm going to do here. Okay, I end up placing, I'm going to pause this really fast. I place this Inferno Tower in the very perfect spot for what I want to do here. You'll notice that my Expo is not positioned centered. It's not right in front of the bridge. It's one tile back and one tile to the side. That allows me to put this Inferno Tower in this tile, which means that it's going to be able to lock onto this this giant, but the giant is actually going to lock onto my Inferno Tower rather than my Expo. This is the perfect position. This is a really great position when you're playing against Beatdown, decks, because this means that the giant's going to lock onto my Inferno Tower, and my counter push here is going to get rid of the Musketeer, and my Expo has plenty of health to be able to lock onto the tower and to actually finish it off. This is tip number 2 when it comes to playing Siege against Beatdown decks, and that is that specific position where you have your offensive win condition a little bit further back, and also one tile to the side, and then you have your Inferno Tower right next to the river, as close to that win condition as possible. Now, it does leave you susceptible to like fireballs and things like that, and that's a struggle if you're playing bait decks or hybrid decks, but if you're playing a fireball bait deck, that should not be that big of a concern to you, because you can basically do whatever you want. You'll notice earlier in that match, and then of course I just placed this Expo right there. That's actually not a great place to put the Expo, but there's only 15 seconds left. There's no way he's going to be able to do a push all the way to get to the bridge and take out both towers, and so I just already know that I've won, which is why I decided to place that down there. So, tip number 1. Play your win condition after you know what their win condition is, and after in the other lane when you're playing against Beatdown. Tip number 2, defensive positioning with that Inferno Tower and your win condition. Let's go ahead and watch this match right up here. Okay, so this is a match up against somebody with a P.E.K.K.A. And then a 3 Musketeer deck. Very heavy deck. Should be a great counter to Expo. Really should be. Here, I do not have a great starting hand. I don't want to make the first move. Like I've talked about, I want to force them to go on the offense. And so he placed that down. I'm going to go ahead and cycle because I know that I can do that. And he puts down a pump, which tells me that I have plenty of time to be able to put a pump. So I put down a pump even before I'm ready to start leaking elixir. And the reason why I did that is because I didn't want him to, or I put down that pump there so that I could, like I said, build up that elixir and force him to go on the offense. Here, I force him to go on the offense, and he makes a move that tells me that he has a bad rotation. So he's trying to get into a good rotation, and that's a good situation for me. He puts down the the P.E.K.K.A. And so that, once again, tip number 1 comes into play here, placing that Expo right there. And he, rather than deciding to counter my Expo, he decides to go on the offense, placing that Ice Golem right there. I end up using the Inferno Tower to get rid of this P.E.K.K.A, and he plays down the 3 Musketeers, and that tells me that I'm in a very difficult situation. I don't have a fireball or anything like that. My response to pumps is a pump itself, so I really have to play smart when it comes to doing this. I'm at a disadvantage already, and I have to play these minions to get rid of that Musketeer before she lands too much damage onto my tower. Every bit of damage on my towers is actually going to play a big role into this match, because if he can get into the corner, into that pocket, and gets one of my towers down, I know that I'm screwed. So I decide to place this pump down back here, and I don't have the opportunity to place down that Expo on the other lane when he puts down this P.E.K.K.A. I'm going to pause this while I talk about this just for a quick second. Now, I could have waited and decided to place the Expo on the other lane, but you do not want your opponent to get such an elixir advantage with those pumps. That would be actually the worst situation. So I decided to do that, and now it's time to play really defensively. So I go ahead and place that pump down there. I don't place down the Expo as soon as I have the elixir to do so, because I know he's going to be able to counter it, and he has more elixir. He has the elixir advantage over me. So I'm forced to really try and go on the defense right here. here we are, we're going on the defense, we're playing just as defensively as we possibly can, and here's tip number 3 right here, where we are ready to go on the counter push. I took advantage of him placing down that P.E.K.K.A, and we're going on the counter push. It is more difficult for a siege decks to go on the counter push than it is for control decks, but there are times when you do need to do so. Here he plays the 3 Musketeers right in the very far back. I place this is a little bit less defensive. This isn't the same defensive position, but I didn't want that Inferno Tower to be taken out by his Musketeer, so I put it a little bit over to the center. Now he has these Barbarians and the Musketeers, and all right here, and so I'm forced to put to do a really quick play. I end up playing the Goblin Gang, and then the Minions, and then the Fire Spirits, so that his Musketeers get shredded by my Fire Spirits. Just kind of a quick gameplay right there. Then all I have to do is take care of this 3 Musketeer on the other side, and we know that I've won. At this last second, I end up putting this Expo in the very far back. That's a turtling position, very defensive. It lets my opponent, it forces my opponent to go on the offense, which is a good thing in a lot of situations. Typically not against beatdown decks. Obviously, I just put it right there because I knew that I had won. But I did want to mention that turtling, where you put that Expo in that center position like that, that is a position that does not work very well against beatdown decks, unless you're playing against somebody with a giant that does not have as much DPS. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you liked it. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. If you'd like more videos on Expo Siege and how to play it, please let me know, and I'll do my best to try and help you guys out. This is Kairos Time ticking by, and we will see you in the arena.